Everything that happens here is going to affect every other place in the world.
When stakes are so high, we will keep fighting.
You were born for this moment.
I'm ready to win.
CBS News. Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan, Sunday on CBS.
CBS Morning.
Your morning routine just got better.
I love that.
CBS Mornings.
I don't think that this is a reflection on the leader. It's a reflection on the body itself and the place where we've come in this country.
I said if we'd have had George, Santos here, but you guys kicked him out. I didn't kick him out. You kicked him out. He'd have been a hard, let's impeach him.
Donald Trump wants chaos. Donald Trump does not want success at the border. He wants chaos, and if he became president, I doubt he'd ever solve it.
They're having a lot of fun on Capitol Hill, aren't they? Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. The Senate failed to advance the joint border and foreign aid bill during a procedural vote today. It fell 11 votes short of the needed 60 votes. Now Majority Leader Chuck Schumer plans to hold a vote on just the $95 billion in aid, legislation without any border provisions. It's unclear if that has the necessary support to pass. Scott McFarland and Weijia Jiang join us now. Scott is a CBS News congressional correspondent, and Weijia is CBS News' senior White House correspondent. Great to have you both with us. Scott, let's begin with you. This was a procedural vote on the Senate border bill, and it has now failed. So what is the state of play on all of these negotiations and discussions?
This was a test vote of sorts to kind of measure support for where people were on this $118 billion border security, Ukraine and Israel aid package. The test failed, and everybody knew it was going to fail. But the vote total is telling, I think, in a bigger way. And as the evening began here at the Capitol, a bigger picture is emerging. Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, wasn't just supporting this bill or championing it over the past 2 weeks. He was triumphantly championing it. He was trying to give it oxygen and rally the troops. The troops did not follow the leader. Just 4 Republicans voted in favor of this bill that Mitch McConnell was the leader on. What does that mean, Bob, for the next big thing to come down the pike? What does that mean if there's a leader in the U.S. Senate who doesn't have his followers in line? This may bode not so well for when the government funding deadlines approach in early March. This may not bode terribly well when it's time for push to come to shove on Ukraine aid, which Mitch McConnell's also been championing, but from which he's had defections among his fellow Republicans. That's the bigger picture as the night begins after a not terribly surprising failure of the border deal today.
Scott, excellent reporting there. And usually in Washington, a lot of these grumbles about Senate Republican leadership happen behind closed doors. But Senator Ted Cruz said it publicly today. Let's listen.
Everyone here also supported a leadership challenge to Mitch McConnell in November. I think a Republican leader should actually lead this conference and should advance the priorities of Republicans.
That was actually Senator Cruz from yesterday, but the point still stands. There are frustrations inside of the Senate GOP. Scott, with the House GOP now failing to pass its Mayorkas impeachment of the DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, what does that mean for Israel funding, for Ukraine funding, and for impeachment moving forward, should the Speaker want to do it again?
You see the same thing happening in both chambers. You have a breakaway faction of Republicans who seem to be overriding, to a degree having some veto power over their own leadership. It manifested itself in the U.S. Senate with that border deal collapsing. It manifested itself in the U.S. House with all of the standoffs and all the failed votes over the past few months. None quite as notorious or high profile as the one last night. 1 vote short, Republicans were, in impeaching Alejandro Mayorkas. They think their odds will be better when Steve Scalise returns from his medical leave in the coming days. They'll probably put this back on the calendar next week. But it shows a bit of dysfunction and a lack of continuity between the leadership of the House and its rank and file members that is going to surface again when those government deadlines or government funding deadlines hit and Israel and Ukraine come back before the U.S. House. There doesn't seem to be, Bob, a critical mass of Republicans in the House ready to back Ukraine aid in any context, in any way. That's also leaking support among Senate Republicans. That's the emerging story here. There's an emergent need for aid to Ukraine. The administration says it, its supporters say that. And I don't see a pathway through right now of getting bipartisan support, a real efficient bipartisan support to pass it.
Weija, when Democrats at the White House and President Biden look at what's happening among House Republicans, among Senate Republicans, what are they saying behind the scenes and to cameras and to reporters like yourself? Are they just going to watch the spectacle for now and hope it all settles eventually, or are they taking some steps to restart the negotiations?
Well, Robert, even before today's procedural vote, President Biden seemed to know what was going to happen. He said that all indications are that this bill won't even move forward on the Senate floor. And his frustration is not directed at Leader Mitch McConnell. It was squarely directed at who appears to be someone who never ceased to be the unofficial leader of the Republican Party, if you ask some, including President Biden, perhaps, because he says this is all the fault of former President Donald Trump. And if you look at the timeline, Robert, of when Trump really started blasting this deal in public, criticizing it and calling on Republicans not to pass it, it does track, because there was a lot of optimism coming from the Senate and coming from White House officials, both in front and behind the scenes, that the Senate would be able to get this through. But once Trump injected himself into it, it all started to crumble. And this is what President Biden had to say about that yesterday.
We're going to secure the border and fund these other programs. Trump and the MAGA Republicans said no, because they're afraid of Donald Trump. Afraid of Donald Trump. Every day between now and November, the American people are going to know that the only reason the border is not secure is Donald Trump and his MAGA Republican friends.
So the strategy now for the president is to continue to hammer home that message that he believes that this is all Donald Trump's fault, that there is no bipartisan border agreement. However, the president still has to figure out what he's going to do about all that other aid that you guys just talked about, because this bill was so essential for funding for Ukraine, for funding for Israel, for funding for the Indo-Pacific. And yesterday, when asked if he'd be willing to support any of those measures separately from the border, or perhaps bundle one or two issues together, somehow figure out a formula to move forward, the president said he wasn't ready to concede that yet, because he was hanging on to some sliver of hope that this would still move forward in its current form. But as we know now, that isn't going to happen.
And Weija, what happens now on immigration and border policy if the White House has no helping hand in terms of congressional assistance, if they're fighting amongst themselves on Capitol Hill? Does it all become executive action for the rest of the year? How does the White House see this issue?
Well, the White House does not believe the president has much more executive action that he can take, which has been their ongoing issue with this. And they've called out Congress for quite some time now, since the very first day he took office, saying that he can only do so much, and it's really up to lawmakers, which is why they expressed that optimism that perhaps for the first time in decades they would be able to come to some sort of bipartisan agreement. But we should remember that even if this was ever going to pass in the Senate, House Republicans, Speaker Johnson made pretty clear that it was going to be pretty near impossible for it to go through the House if it didn't include all of their priorities. So even before Trump started getting involved in the conversation, House Republicans told the administration as much, that it would be very difficult. And so that is why the president is so upset right now, because he felt like they were getting closer, that they were making some sort of movement, and he felt that he could find an agreement with House Republicans somewhere, and that just didn't happen. But to answer your question, Bob, there's not much more that he can do with regard to executive action.
I remember a decade ago, then Vice President Biden used to go to the Hill all the time to work with Senator McConnell on those fiscal deals when things were hitting a snag. A different Washington now. A lot of chaos, a lot of anger and frustration on both sides. Scott McFarlane and Weijia Jiang, thank you. Appreciate it. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas may have survived impeachment this round, but House Speaker Mike Johnson says they'll vote on that again. We'll discuss the state of Johnson's speakership. That's coming up next on America Decides.
Well, let me start with this.
This really happened.
Have you told the government?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
You want me to just
What's
keep
wrong
going?
with that argument?
What have you learned?
Do you know why?
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 It's time for 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish
That
you and
we
I are going to
just-
have.
Yep.
Oh my God.
Is it good? Mm-hmm. Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
So if we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
On 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
He was there when the war in Ukraine started.
Extreme history. It's a big moment.
The extraordinary story behind Sean Penn's new Paramount Plus documentary, Superpower, when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
Human remains found this week.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
A gripping true crime original, 48 Hours, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
How can we become our best selves? That may be more about character than talent.
The ultimate mark of your potential is how far you've climbed, not how high you've gone.
Realizing your true potential with Adam Grant as we go person to person.
It was a mess what happened here, but we're cleaning it up. I don't think that this is a reflection on the leader, it's a reflection on the body itself and the place where we've come in this country.
Welcome back to America Decides. House Speaker Johnson is working to divert blame for the Republicans and their failed attempt at impeaching DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. He also says the fight isn't over yet.
Mayorkas needs to be held accountable. The Biden administration needs to be held accountable, and we will pass those articles of impeachment. We'll do it on the next round.
Jasmine Wright and Leanne Caldwell join us now. Jasmine is a politics reporter at Notice. Leanne is co-author of the Washington Post's Early 202 and an anchor for Washington Post Live. Great to have you both here. Jasmine, we'll begin with you, but first I want to play Congressman Nels and what he had to say about this failed vote about the DHS secretary.
I said, you know what? I said, if we'd have had George, Santos here, but you guys kicked him out. I didn't kick him out. You kicked him out. He'd have been a hard, let's impeach him. So sometimes we got to be careful what we ask for.
When they're pining for Congressman Santos to come back and be a vote, it's pretty indicative of where things stand among House Republicans. Where do they go from here?
I think that is a major question. Obviously, there are some on the far right of the Republican Party who want to see this bill brought to the floor again, who want to see Mayorkas impeached. But of course, the votes just don't work in their favor, particularly on those arguments from not just moderates like Ken Buck, but also some in the far right party, former Freedom Caucus members, who say that this does not set a good precedent for Republicans if Democrats are back in the majority come 2024 in November. So I think that there's a major question of how this goes forward. But clearly there are many, many, many Republicans in that party and in the Congress who are just so upset with Mayorkas and what's happening on the border, who want to see this bill fulfilled. But can they get there? I mean, I think that that's the major question.
Leanne, great to have you here. What's your take on that? I read Congressman Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin, his op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, a Republican, saying he's against this move for impeachment. Are some Republicans listening to him about that argument that if, let's say, former President Trump or Nikki Haley wins the presidency as a Republican, that they're going to face constant possible impeachments in 2025?
Yeah, well, obviously that was what Gallagher is most concerned about. He said that Republicans made the same arguments when Democrats were impeaching Trump when Trump was in office, and now that Republicans are also lowering the bar for impeachment. The interesting thing about Gallagher is he not only voted against this, and he said that he has been a no for a long, long time on this. This was no surprise to leadership. But he also took his argument really publicly in the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, which has sometimes a more conservative readership and where establishment conservatives read the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal. But my sources on Capitol Hill are saying they're confident that if Johnson brings this forward again, that it will pass. Because if a member who, there are several members who did not want to vote for this, but they already voted for it. So it's going to be very hard for them to switch their opinion, to their vote to vote against it. So Republicans are confident, but there is a lot of concern among some Republicans and many Democrats that this is just opening the door and weakening the meaning of impeachment.
I'd like to turn to President Biden. He's on the campaign trail today, raising some money, I believe, in New York. He just got through, Jasmine, the South Carolina Democratic primary, won a sweeping victory. Right. But there's a real question, even though he won such a big win in South Carolina, whether he has the support of black voters nationwide at the level he needs. You wrote an article for Notice with the headline, Biden has lost support among black voters. His allies blame misinformation. Coming out of South Carolina, what's your reporter's assessment of where President Biden stands with his one of those key coalitions?
Yeah, I think if you were to talk to the Biden campaign, which I do pretty frequently, they would say that President Biden is coming out strong. That resounding, decisive win that he notched in South Carolina was indicative of the fact that black supporters do support him in re-election. They said that they increased black voter support in South Carolina by like 13 or more percent. So they're saying that they're really on top of that coalition. But when I talk to other black voters in this country, they don't really say the same thing. In fact, I talked to two separate groups of black women who met with the Biden campaign, who basically said that if they don't really redirect their efforts and really talk to this disillusioned group, that's not just black men, but it's also black women, that they're going to lose that section. Now, they asked for a couple of different things, including more black women at the senior level, also messaging, but also things like having fun campaign merch. So it depends on who you talk to. I think that the campaign is way more confident than what you hear from black voters on the ground, who frankly say things like President Biden hasn't fulfilled his student loan promises. President Biden hasn't done enough on the economy. And that's where that kind of misinformation part gets into, because when you talk to Democrats on the Hill, they say that that has been pushed by Republicans, really trying to misinform the public that Biden really needs most. But again, it just really is going to function on how well the Biden campaign can actually talk to this vital group of voters.
Leanne, on another front related to President Biden and his campaign, immigration, border security, I asked Wee Jiang about this a few minutes ago. If Congress continues to have paralysis on this issue, what are Democrats on Capitol Hill telling you about what they want the president to do to address this issue, not only for himself politically, but for themselves?
So there are some Democrats like Joe Manchin who wants to call a national emergency on the border. There are others who are saying that the president should pass executive orders about the border potentially. But really, the politics of immigration, Democrats at this point think could place the blame a little bit on Republicans because they are walking away from a deal to secure the border. Of course, this is a deal that, while Republicans say would only make the situation worse, is the most conservative border policies that we've seen in at least 3 decades, potentially a lot longer. So, and there's some concerns about, on the Republican side too, that they will get blamed for walking away for this deal. So there is a lot of internal politics happening when it comes to the border, where Republicans were confident that they win on this issue. President Biden or President Trump thinks that he wins on this issue. That's why he wants the issue to remain, and that's why he does not want a deal on the border. But down ballot, it could become a lot more complicated.
And very quickly, from both of you, in about just a few seconds, Speaker Johnson, to lose all these votes, what's his political capital right now with his own members?
I mean, I think it looks shaky, but the bottom line is that he's having the same problem as McCarthy, which is that he is not the de facto leader of Republicans. Former President Trump is, and they fear former President Trump, and they don't fear Speaker Johnson, and so that is going to be something that he's going to have to contend with over and over and over again.
Leanne, quickly.
Yeah, there's a lot of concern about a vacuum of leadership of Speaker Johnson. But I will say, looking a little bit forward, if the Senate does pass Ukraine funding, there is no way Johnson can bring it up. He will most likely lose his job.
Hardball politics. Jasmine Wright and Leanne Caldwell, thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Former President Donald Trump wasn't even on the primary ballot in Nevada, but Nikki Haley still came in second. We'll analyze the results and what this means for her campaign. You're streaming America Decides.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has that glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's a country music legend, philanthropist, fashion icon, and now rock star.
I think there's a lot to be said about being comfortable with who you are.
Find out what's next for Dolly Parton when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She is a beloved American icon and head of a media empire. But is Oprah Winfrey happy? How do you define happiness?
Yeah, I call it happiness.
Find out when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
It was genocide, a deliberate effort by the United States government to eliminate the food source that was relied upon by Native American tribes.
American bison were slaughtered and Native Americans displaced.
And that's how tribes were subjugated to reservations and our lands were taken.
But But now, through conservation efforts at Yellowstone,
Buffalo provided everything that we needed. Now they need help.
a herd grows
We need to step up and help them.
and a culture is reborn.
When the buffalo return and come back, that's when our tribe will begin to heal.
Yellowstone Bison Revival, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. Former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley now campaigning in California after finishing second in the Nevada Republican primary. A majority of voters picked, quote, none of these candidates. It's a ballot option required by state law there. Former President Trump was not on the ballot, and no delegates were at stake. Nevada is holding another contest, Republican caucuses. That's tomorrow. A lot to follow with what's going on in Nevada. To help us out, Ed O'Keefe and Nydia Cavazos join us now. Ed is CBS News' senior White House and political correspondent. Nydia is a CBS News campaign reporter. I want to begin, Nydia, with playing something from Ambassador Haley on Fox Business. Let's listen.
We didn't spend a day or a dollar there. We weren't even worried about it. It's why we haven't talked about it. Our focus is on South Carolina, going into Michigan, going into Super Tuesday. Those are the places that we're worried about.
And Nydia, I want to read something the Haley campaign, which you track daily, issued as a statement. Let's show it on the screen here. Quote, even Donald Trump knows that when you play penny slots, I don't do that, but the House wins, it says. We didn't bother to play a game rigged for Trump. We're full steam ahead in South Carolina and beyond. A lot of bravado there, Nydia, from the Haley campaign. Confidence heading into her home state of South Carolina. What's your read about what happened in Nevada and what's ahead for her in South Carolina?
That's exactly right, Bob. While it's been quite a news day for Nikki Haley, and many have been saying that this was an embarrassing loss for Haley, she, on the other hand, as well as her campaign, have been saying that they were never truly focused on Nevada in the first place. They didn't have any campaign stops whatsoever. They didn't spend any resources as far as money in the state because they opted out for it early on in the race. They said they weren't willing to pay the $55,000 fee in order to be able to participate in a system and in a process that they've said all along that it was rigged specifically to help out former President Donald Trump. And so while many are calling it an embarrassing loss, they're saying that their focus continues to be South Carolina. And as far as Super Tuesday, they say they have the sufficient resources and more than enough to go the long distance. And so they're also focusing now on these states such as Massachusetts, campaigning here in California, and next week in Texas, where they say that 11 out of the 16 Super Tuesday states are semi-open or open primary. So this means that independents will be able to vote. And specifically, Haley's campaign is now focused on courting independents who are going to be able to participate in these semi or open primaries.
In the meantime, Ed, I wondered if UNLV is going to offer you a professor gig, because you've been doing some great reporting explaining the differences between the Nevada primary and the Nevada Republican caucuses. There are these caucuses that are still going to happen this week. Help us understand what they mean. Will they be any different in terms of the likely result from what happened in the primary?
No, this is a caucus that's designed to be Donald Trump's and Donald Trump's only, essentially. He's not the only candidate on the ballot, or some other lesser known names, but the state party here, understanding that he does better in that format, essentially made sure that it was the option, and it was the only option that was going to reward delegates. They fought the change in state law back in 2021 that mandated primaries, because before they had done caucuses, a judge ruled that because the parties set the rules of how they nominate their presidential candidates, the state parties can choose how to do it. So they held that primary, which didn't count, which was a bit of an embarrassment perhaps for the Haley campaign, despite the bravado. And they'll hold the caucus tomorrow night that's designed to give him the win. The thing to watch more than anything now, Bob, is how many people show up to cast ballots in that caucus versus cast ballots at the primary Tuesday night. There is some belief that none of these candidates' decision and the fact that it won was a trick played by Trump supporters in this state to come out and embarrass Haley. If that was their plan, it worked. Now let's see how many show up to affirm their support for the former president tomorrow night.
And Ed, what did you learn from all your conversations with voters there in recent days? Is this really still Trump's party in places like Nevada?
If it is, that's going to be an issue trying to win over those that are not Republican, independents, maybe even Democrats who are considering or would consider voting for the Republican candidate were it not Donald Trump. And so there's a reminder here of the potential limitations of his appeal in a state that Republicans would desperately like to win. The 6 electoral votes here are critical, but in the conversations we've had, candidates, the main ones at least, are not ones they prefer. They do have the option again in November, Bob, of voting for none of these candidates on the ballot if they so choose.
And Nydia, just quickly here, let's look at the Super Tuesday map. You've been working so hard traveling, covering the Haley campaign. Of all of these states, what are you really paying attention to? What should we have on our radar as Haley tries to stay in this thing?
Well, we're going to be going into South Carolina, but we sort of already know what we're going to expect. You know, Nikki Haley hasn't been saying that she's expecting to win. She's expecting to build on her game. But as far as Super Tuesday states, we have to look out for states like Massachusetts, where over 60% of the registered state voters are independents. And so this is where Nikki Haley is trying to court support. And it's a similar situation to what we saw in New Hampshire. So this is truly the opportunity for Haley to be able to gather the support and close in on former President Donald Trump.
Back to New England we go, likely. Ed O'Keefe and Nydia Cavazos, thank you. That does it for us today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
Original documentary from CBS reports tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital